Alright, welcome back everyone. This is Shadow Drake. I've improved this a little bit. Okay, so for this video, the first improvement that I can think of would be pressurizing your liquid pipes. And I'll be honest, the results of my test surprised me that I had to repeat them several times. And once again, I hit that weird thing where the atmospherics did things that I didn't expect. So I had 50-50 results and I had to repeat them. So here are my findings. So, I removed the counterflow on the back one. Recall that both of these are filled with 900 moles of pollutants. The only difference between the two, however, is this liquid pipe network has no pollutant, it only has pollutant, has no other pressurant gas. This one, however, does have some pressurant gas. I'm pretty sure this is on. That is indeed on. Alright. And so because of that, that means that anytime, and I make sure there's enough pressure, anytime we get condensed pollutants from this chamber, it's going to stay as a liquid here and come straight into the evaporation chamber. Now, for the phase change devices, my original hypothesis was that if you have any sort of evaporation or condensation in your liquid pipes, that's work that could have been done in your evaporation chamber that is no longer happening there. So my original hypothesis was that you have slightly less efficiency in the system. Now, what I actually find out in practicality is that the extra liquid pollutants actually came into the evaporation chamber. As you can see, I have a much higher fill rate, 326 269 versus 135 280. And because of this, I have a higher liquid count in the second evaporation chamber compared to the first. And so what I did is tied them both to the same pipe network, so that way they'll both be heat exchanging. And when I removed this pipe, I expected to see this chamber outperform that chamber. I repeated the test a couple of times, and surprisingly, this chamber had a better performance of cooling compared to this chamber. And that surprised me. I went back and redid this test. I even put some pipe valves in between the two just so that I can verify it. But to be fair, right now there's not really a lot of extra evaporation happening here, considering that the evap chamber basically sucks it up. And again, 50-50, sometimes there was some here evaporating, sometimes there was not. So I really had to try to get rid of all the variables. So then the thought came that since this chamber did better, the biggest difference is that there's only 5.5 rough liters of liquid pollutants versus this one has double that, 13 liters. So what that means is any sort of evaporation that happens here, you spend less of this latent energy cooling down the liquids. Compared to this chamber, you spend more of it needing to cool down these liquids to affect a greater change in the pipe network. And as you can see, I technically have a greater latent heat on the right side versus the left, even though they're all tied together, and that's just part of the whole random variety, the randomness to this. So, if I remove this pipe, you will kind of see that the right side seems to be changing the temperature much quicker than the left, which is what I saw, and that's what baffled me. However, one thing that I forgot is that if we add a load, so they each get a pipe radiator, and now remove them separately, we will see something different. As you can see, the right side is having a harder time adjusting to this temperature. And by that I mean it is being affected more easily, and that is because there is significantly less pollutants at that temp. So it is working harder to cool this medium, but it's also being affected by the temperature increase. Compared to this chamber, is not affected as much. And this all came not really because of this pressure, but because I have more liquids filled in there. So for the same amount of pollutants on both chambers, pressurizing the liquid pipe ensured that more of my pollutants made it into the evap chamber, and it basically provides a thermal buffer. And as we can see here, that buffer does seem to be helping. The right chamber is already above 30 Celsius, and the left chamber is still a little bit below. All right. So, in short, pressurizing the liquid pipe means that we will need less overall coolant to perform the same job. And I did empty out this chamber and filled it to exactly the same amount to match up this chamber, and the performance was near identical. So that at least tells me that partially the reason these chambers are throttled is part of the whole evaporation mechanics and the fact that these chambers only have 200-liter capacity, and I guess the same fill rate gets roughly the same performance. See, now we're cooling back down again because it is colder now in Vulcan. So it looks like the chambers caught up, are finally outperforming the radiators in the cool nighttime. So let's see. And as we see again, this chamber is cooling down faster compared to the pressurized liquid chamber. Alright, so I'm going to repeat this test, except this time I'm going to add a counterflow heat exchanger. So let's be right back in just a moment. Alright, now we're back. I added the counterflow heat exchangers to both of them. You're going to see that basically the pipe system looks kind of funny, but it still basically keeps the same premise. This side is pressurized so that all pollutants stay as liquids, and this side is not. So the first one is not pressurized, the second one is. And once again, I kind of have this, I try to equalize them. I really should just have my wrench over here so I can stop doing that. And so we're about roughly the same point. And redoing this test, this is where I definitely saw the differences. We can see this side still has the 12.9 liters, so versus the 3.76. I don't know why this one decreased a little bit. I guess more of it is pooling in here now, or there's a reason for this to pool because of the broken up pipe network. And actually, this is really why I had the hypothesis. You see, there is evaporation that is happening here. That is some latent energy that is occurring here that is not occurring in the evaporation chamber. And we also seem to have a tiny amount that happens here before it gets immediately sucked in. So technically, we have some gas evaporating here, which kind of helps to cut, which is why I feel this one would do worse. And as we can see here, there is none of that happening. There is no latent energy. So that means, theoretically, the bulk of the work should be in the evaporation chamber. Unfortunately, there's not really a good way to know what is happening. But as before, it seems like the smaller amount of liquid is struggling to keep the temperature. Now, this is daytime temps, so they're both going to struggle no matter what. Because, I mean, this is going to get to about 15 kilojoules eventually. But an interesting thing to note is that now the rate of change is slower than last time. Last time when this happened, without the counterflow, this kind of spiked up there relatively quickly. Now they're both staying at about the same temperature range. And as you can see, the one with the more liquids does have that advantage. Now, like I said, when I ran this test multiple times, I had a lot of different results, and I don't need a spray can, where it seems like they did roughly the same job. So let me go on ahead and reconnect these. Let them equalize a bit, because I know that's very limited. And you can see that this one recovers faster because of the less liquids. So let's see if they will equalize a little bit more than this. Alright, they're roughly equal as they are right now. And actually, interestingly enough, you see that the one on the left now is caught up. I haven't even broken the thing apart. Let's do that now. Now you see that before, the one on the left with the pressurized liquid pipes actually was slower to cool down compared to the one on the right. And I don't know if this is because this now has less liquids evaporating. It could be. It could not be the case. But now the pressurized one is doing extra cooling. Again, my hypothesis is that this extra latent energy, so that's 57, and that's positive. There's condensation happening here. That's what that implies. Yeah, there's some condensation happening here. Is hindering the ability for this to work properly or to work effectively. And you can see that the disparity is getting bigger and bigger. In fact, I kind of wonder if I let this heat up a bit. Will it actually overtake? Yep, so now it's cooling again. Yeah, it's already got a... Well, it's got a stronger rate of cooling because there is technically trying to cool down more. So that's kind of the disparity. This is the hard part about testing this. You have to kind of watch the rates and judge for yourself how well it is doing. Like, I do expect this number to naturally decrease, and it is currently decreasing, as it gets closer to 20 Celsius. This one is decreasing as it's getting closer to 20 Celsius. This one is indeed decreasing at a slower rate. So it does look like it will catch up eventually and probably overtake it. So, unlike the purely connected phase change devices, this is kind of more of a result I expected to see. And it actually does help to ensure that we do get a good amount of efficiency out of the pressurized liquid pipes. Now, one thing I will note is that because you pressurize the liquid pipes, you are now more vulnerable to huge temperature swings in this pipe network. I would definitely recommend putting some form of purge valve safety system. Because if, for example, this gets extremely hot, you will note that this pipe network is already at 4 megapascals at 30 Celsius. Now, 273 plus 30, that's about 300. So, okay, so yeah. It'll take roughly another 50% increase of that temperature. So, 300, 150, spitballing here, so that's 450 Kelvin. Well, actually, the easier thing would have been to just add 150, so that'll be 180. So about 180 Celsius, this should technically hit 6 megapascals of pressure. And yeah, that's past the pollutants condensation temp. But that means you're going to get the pipe groanings much earlier than that. And that is something to worry about with this. Also, another safety issue to concern is if this cools down, this pipe network will get colder. Which means if you're trying to pressurize this and keep it all at 4 megapascals, as this pipe network gets colder, more nitrogen or more of your pressurant gas will get in here. So that the next time you get a big upswing in temperature, now you have more gas in here that could potentially overpressurize. And now that we look back, we see that this pipe has overtaken the not as filled one. Now, one thing that I am wondering is if this is probably because there's not as much liquids. So let me try to balance out the liquids and we'll rerun this test again. So I'm just gonna... I think what I'll end up doing is add more to this. So be right back. Okay. We got them equal again. So let's remove that and see what happens. So my guess was that this side was not as filled. And I got it roughly, well, a little bit undershot it. But roughly 1.5 liters less than the right. But they should theoretically be going at about roughly the same rate. As you can see, they're kind of a little bit closer this time. So I wonder if maybe the original test was that this one was, quote, underfilled for the job. And see, this is kind of where testing these mechanics is kind of a difficult thing. You got a lot of parameters to test. But as you can see, the rate of change seems to be about the same. You know, this one's dropping by 2, the other one's dropping by 2 as well. So that kind of leads me to believe that maybe this one was starved for liquids and therefore didn't have as much going into it. And if I were to re-add the convection radiators, they should be roughly about the same. Now I did add the one on the left to help to keep it up at temps, and so far they're about equal. And I do understand the one on the left has a little bit more liquids. But as you still kind of see, this one is still... it's still increasing a little bit faster. And I would like to say that this is explained the way that I think I still undershot it. I added what should have been enough, but there's still another 50 moles or so of pollutants that isn't added here. So I added another 200 moles to this one. But yeah, at least this kind of goes to show, if there's a conclusion to be drawn from this, is pressurizing the pipe network will still give you the extra coolant in the liquids for the evaporation chamber. And it does seem to help its overall efficiency. And it still kind of goes back to the fact that they still perform about the same when their fill is about the same. But one thing that I have noticed that's a big difference is now that they're closer together, this evaporation, this heat pump is performing better with the pressurized liquids. So, I definitely would recommend more people to make temps, maybe improve my setups to more better confirm, because there's a lot of potential errors that I may have come across. And honestly, seeing this still at least supports my claim that this is working better at cooling now compared to the other. Alright, so there we go. Useful tip number 1, pressurize the liquid pipes. And since I don't really know where technically to add this, so I will say that when the condensation chamber starts to get filled up and slowed down with condensation, you're going to naturally have gas pooling in the gas pipe networks. And thanks to the fact that we now have utility insulated pipes, the easiest fix for that is to literally add inline tanks. So after all, ideal gas law PV equals nRT means that if we have more volume, there will be less pressure inside these pipes, which will in turn mean that you have a lower chance of condensing your coolant gas inside the gas pipes. This was not possible before because we didn't have insulated utility pipes. Now we do. So, this is Shadow Drake. When we next return, we are going to make some custom condensation chambers because it is, one, the easiest thing to do, and we can see about how to make improvements on them. Alright, hope to see you then.